What are we talking about today, ladies?
Let's talk about feedback, not just giving
Okay.
it, but receiving it.
About what to do when you receive feedback that feels like platitudes. Like I've received feedback that's like, "You're doing great, more of the same, please." And I was like, That's not really helping me. Like I want to be able to develop and progress. So what do I do with this? Doesn't help actually. So I've switched, and actually I most often encourage people where they think it's going to be a positive outcome to ask for advice and give the setup to be like, I'm really glad that you think that I'm doing really well. I'd like to get to blah blah blah, wherever you want to get. Can you give me some advice that would help me get there? I think that's much more
Hmm.
helpful, actually.
Yeah, having sometimes it's a little like trying to operate in a vacuum, especially if it's your line manager and they're like, yeah, everything's good. How do you think it's going? Yeah, great. And you're like, okay, that I can't really take that anywhere. So I think that's a good
Mm.
strategy to pull out when you're or a good tool to be like, oh, okay, so let's try and get into some specifics. These are some this is the next raft of projects I was thinking about taking on, and what do you think? And trying to ask some more pointed questions. Yeah, we've all been there
Mm.
and had. Let's stay on the positive side first, and then we can talk about the flip side, because I'm sure we've all had um,
Oh, I'm sure.
moments where we're grinding our teeth, going, "Oh, okay, yeah, staying open. I'm listening. I'm taking it in."
I struggle with the good feedback that's got hooks. You know, when someone says, yeah, that was fine, good job. I'm like, no, you had a different expectation, or it's not quite what you hoped. Like, you know, when you can kind of tell. Um,
Mm,
I find that really frustrating. And I'm always like, as I said, I'm going to take that. That's a really good tip, Fiona, about asking for advice to us to do something better. And I always try and give really specific feedback. And actually, I was talking about this in a webinar that I did recently about giving feedback. And I originally wrote the exercise around obviously making, difficult feedback or unpleasant to hear feedback more specific and really quantifiable and something that people can really act on. And then when I read back through it, I thought, no, hang on, we're just as bad at giving good feedback well. And exactly what you said, I had some things like, oh, you did a good job. And actually, we need to be saying, this was of all that you did great, maybe, but there are always going to be a couple of things that you did particularly well. Or I like the way that you made space for questions and there was that extra pause to allow people to think. Just, it doesn't need to be like the whole thing, does it? It can be something really, really small, but really demonstrates, when I say I mean good, I mean this is my version of good that I'm appreciating from what you've done. um
yeah.
because I don't like that. It was fine. It's almost like that post interview when you don't get the job and they're like, you were appointable, you did really well, someone else just was better. I'm like, but how exactly were they
Wow.
better? Like, what
Yeah.
what do I need to do, or what could I have done, or what experience do I need to have that would have compensated? Because I think that's worse than telling someone they did a bad job. At least they're like, right, well, at least I know what I need to work on if I didn't answer the question or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to work with like my first line manager when I got my first job in HE. She was so good at this, and if we were ever doing anything like, sometimes we'd have to go sort of as a team and give like updates or run workshops or those kind of things. She would always keep us all as the team back in the room. Like everyone else would like have finished the meeting and left, and she would keep us all in the room just for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. And she would make us go around the group, and the person who presented or spoke had to give themselves a review, and then everybody else would offer an insight about, exactly as you said, Rachel, like, I thought you did this really well. I thought maybe next time you could slow down, or this bit was a bit rushed, or people seemed a bit confused about that bit. And it was really helpful to
Mm,
have kind of post event review in the room before everybody then moved on to the next thing, because I think we're often so just in the rush to get to the next thing. And I tried in then teams I was managing to keep that same practice, because I think it's really helpful to give that live action feedback to people.
It links with the fundamental importance of specificity when you're giving any kind of feedback or instruction, because you can't do anything with, like I said, platitudes or vague things. And in that moment, that's a lot fresher in the mind. But also, people haven't got a chance to overthink how a piece of feedback might be received, or it's quite organic in that moment. So that sounds really constructive. But also, that builds a culture of reflection by doing it regularly.
And
That
learning
is
as
really
well.
positive.
We were all really open to hearing from each other about what was good and what we could improve on. It was quite a similar, I know a lot of people now have done coach training, and often coach training or like mediation training or counselling training, those types of things, where you have to work in triads, and there's the person practicing the skill, the person bringing the thing to be practiced on, and then the observer who's there with the sole purpose of giving feedback. I think those kind of practices are really great for people to get used to. Paying attention and being able to observe in a way that gives you a lot of feedback to be able to offer, if it's given in a supportive way, can be such a gift.
I did an exercise like that a couple of years ago in a session, a course I was doing, and it was really, really interesting because they kind of flipped it on their heads. So as the person having feedback given about them, I was the observer, I was the silent one, and the two were talking about me as though I wasn't there, and kind of that. And it was really, really interesting. It was a really different experience, kind of being a fly on the wall. And obviously they knew that I was sat right there with them, and so they weren't slagging me off or anything. But I was able to observe and hear it in a different way than when you're kind of directly receiving it, and you've got that, if it's something really nice and you're like, part of you's delighted and part of you's just mortified and embarrassed and being like, oh my god, I just took it. And I don't know why we sometimes have that reaction, because you want to hear nice things about yourself, but we're also trained and led to believe that that's somehow, it's not okay to celebrate your wins. And if you've had an upbringing like mine, where you kind of, if you internalize that message, it can be really uncomfortable getting feedback, even when it's something really nice, even when somebody's really raving about something. And then of course the cynicism starts to creep in and go, well, if they're being that enthusiastic, they must not really mean it. It's really easy to undermine yourself, even when somebody's trying to be nice, or trying to say nice things. Anyway, I'm going to shush now.
I think that for me, there's two aspects to this. One being that specific feedback that's good is definitely easier to take than the generic, like, you as a person did a great job. That feels a bit uncomfortable. Whereas when someone's like, the specific thing you did, it becomes in a weird way more about the work than you as an individual, or for me anyway. And I think in the same way, from the other side, I was thinking that there's a difference when you're asking for feedback. Sometimes it's different saying, you did that well. Like, if you're a peer, not if you're a manager, but if you're like a peer and you're talking to a colleague, you did that well, is whereas if someone says to you, oh, how did so and so do, and you're like, oh, well, so and so did this, there's a slight externalization that goes on, I think, and it's a bit less like directly confrontation. It kind of goes via someone who's facilitating, and actually that can be a little bit more comfortable if when people and I think that might be part of it, because weirdly I was just thinking, like, it's the difference between hearing, you did that really well, or Rachel did that really well. And it's almost like you're hearing someone observe it. It's like, I don't know, it's just like weirdly external to yourself.
Yeah.
We're getting deep, but that's sort of how it feels to me.
Yeah. That was definitely where I was going with it. And I think that was the experience, was that it just shifted it that little bit more. And it was really almost like I could delight in it more, because I wasn't in the hot seat, so to speak. I wasn't worried about having the right reaction to them to their face saying something, you know, where you start to second, oh, I don't want to look too smug. Oh, I don't want to, I don't want to look too pleased with myself or whatever. And, you know, it was an interesting observation. It was a different experience.
You use the same kind of framing when I encourage colleagues to advocate for themselves or to highlight their successes. It can be really difficult to highlight what you've done, but if you highlight the work and then highlight and then specify your contribution, that can feel like when you're building that confidence of speaking up. So rather than being like, well, I did X, Y, Z, that can feel really uncomfortable. If you can be like, well, we achieved da 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 because through this project that I led. So you're taking the person, you're putting yourself at the end of this frame of the anecdote rather than at the beginning.
Yeah, though I think if people feel confident too, they should just own it, put themselves at the front.
Oh, they should,
But I
they
think if
should.
people
But
value
lots of people in our
it,
space are not like they're very tentative about it.
I appreciate that, and I think as an intermediary step of learning to claim and advocate for oneself, I think it's a great practice to get into. But I also think the ultimate goal is own it, outright.
Yeah. But it's interesting because there's various programs and organizations where they're, you know, they put out the call for nominations for awards, for the annual awards, you know, and then it's tumbleweeds because nobody wants to say, or nobody wants to look arrogant and going, I did this thing and I think it was really great. And I think people should, you know, we should celebrate it. I want to jump up and down about it and shout it from the rooftops. But again, you're kind of, the vibe is that sort of thing just it isn't done, you know, and we have to get over that. I think we have to, it's, you know, we're all about sharing good practice, but then when we actually want to celebrate it, it's like, oh, well, that's just taken it a bit too far. But
no, that's true. That's definitely true on an individual basis. But then if you think about things like the Times Higher Awards and stuff like that, they're all self-nominated. It's always institutions writing good news stories about themselves and the projects that they've delivered and all of this. Like my husband's been at a series of awards. He works in the banking sector. He's been at a series of awards recently. And all of them are self-nominated, where companies are going, oh, look at what we've done in this space. Isn't that exciting? We definitely deserve an accolade. And it's like, you know, totally allowable. And then they're like also paying money to have a table at the event and go and receive the awards and all of that stuff.
Okay, folks, this turned into a really long episode and we decided to make it into a two-parter. So tune in next time where we'll talk about the more challenging side of receiving feedback.